for inviting me to give a presentation on the current work that we're doing through the Emergency Prevention, Preparedness, and Response Working Group. I'll probably say EPPR a lot. So I recently took over as the chair in May of this year. So just a little background on myself. I come from an emergency response background. I did respond to the Silendang IU and have been focused on spill preparedness activities in the Arctic since about 2005, and have been very alarmed of the way that the Arctic is changing and the risks that are associated with shipping and other activities, oil and gas, of course, but just the changing environment and how that may impact the potential for spills in the Arctic environment. And my day job is I work for the NOAA's Office of Response and Restoration, and I lead a group that does web mapping and ArcGIS mapping and data management for oil spills and hazardous waste sites. In the last 5.5 years, we've been very involved in Deepwater Horizon, and I mentioned that one because I've been very involved in it, but also a lot of lessons learned from Deepwater Horizon can be applied in the Arctic. So I'm assuming most people are pretty familiar with the Arctic Council and that the EPPR is one of 6 working groups. If people need more background on the Arctic Council, I'd be happy to provide that, either put it on the website or send it via email. But just kind of the overall goals of the EPPR working group is to contribute to the protection of the Arctic environment from threats or impacts that may result from pollutants, and we're pretty focused on oil spills as our pollutant. EPPR, when it started, had a very large emphasis on radionuclides, and so that is part of our mandate. And then we're also considering questions related to consequences of natural disasters, and one of the new observers, the University of the Arctic, is going to be helping us and kind of looking at that as part of our portfolio going forward. And then the group is made up of obviously oil spill experts that are pretty operationally focused, even though this is really more of a policy guidance group. And there's a lot of Coast Guard entities on the working group through the national delegations. So we're already involved in search and rescue, but in 2015 at the ministerial meeting, they officially put search and rescue on EPPR's mandate. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but has implications on how we relate to other external bodies and making sure that we're not duplicating efforts that might be handled under other fora. So I'm going to go through just kind of the deliverables that we actually produced under the Canadian chairmanship, and then I'm going to talk about our work plan for 2015 through 2017, so under the U.S. chairmanship, and then I'll provide some contact information. And if you all have questions as I go, please feel free to just stop and ask. So this is I'm just going to all of these reports are on our website, and I'll give you that website at the end. So if you have more interest in getting the reports, you'll be able to access that. So this first project was delivered. It was basically a compendium of all of the environmental hazards and national programs for all of the Arctic states, all of the 8 Arctic nations. So all of that was captured and put into one report. This one, the Arctic Guide on Oil Spill Response in Ice and Snow, is a guidance document that the IMO requested that EPPR take on and develop. EPPR opted to just focus on the Arctic version, obviously, but IMO produced the exact same document for polar, so it encompasses Antarctica. I do have a few hard copies of this book. It's actually pretty well put together and has lots of good visuals. So if anyone's interested in the actual hard copy, let me know, and I'll be happy to send you a copy. As I mentioned, radiological incidents are part of our purview. And Russia puts on an exercise every year. So this Arctic 2014 is a report in the exercise handbook from that year's effort. And those are ongoing, just for people's awareness, and they're pretty interested in having people come and observe and be part of those exercises if there's interest. So again, the adjustment of expanding search and rescue. So I said I come from an oil spill response background. So search and rescue is often a little bit a part of a pollution incident that obviously happens first, and then the pollution aspect comes in, and there is a lot of overlap in actors, but there's also a lot of different entities involved in the search and rescue. So, for example, the Department of Defense and the Coast Guard are the primaries in the U.S., and that's not necessarily the same across the other nations. So there are different people involved in the early parts of the SAR incident that they don't necessarily stick around for the pollution part of it. So one of the things that, there's a new Coast Guard forum, the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, that was just signed into effect at the Coast Guard Academy last week. I'm assuming everyone has seen the press on that. There is some overlap in mandates between EPPR and the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, and we're trying very hard to make sure we understand where that overlap lies and that we are keeping each other informed and not duplicating efforts. So the U.S. Coast Guard Forum is a much more operationally oriented body, and comprises the competent authorities from most of the Coast Guards and the Departments of Defense around the Arctic countries. So that is we're just starting to figure out how we're going to work together on that. And there's another group out there, the Arctic Offshore Regulators Forum, which also sprung up in the last year or two and has potential overlapping mandates. But again, it's an understanding of where our respective niches are. So we'll be focusing on that for the next few years and trying to get that in a place that makes sense for everyone. So kind of the basics that the EPPR delegation has agreed to do is share information about Arctic SAR exercises or incidents and post lessons learned on our website. So pretty simple. There was a major SAR exercise in Anchorage on the margins of the senior Arctic officials meeting a few weeks ago in Anchorage, Arctic Zephyr, and I think people probably on the call were either involved in that or aware of that. And the end result of that was to collaborate with EPPR on search and rescue. So overall, I think that was a good exercise. Lots of lessons learned that we'll all be culling through and learning from, and putting those into the next exercise that may be exercised under this agreement. The other major agreement that EPPR is responsible for implementing is called the Arctic Marine Oil Spill Preparedness and Response Agreement, and everything has an acronym, and you'll hear people say MOSPA. They're referring to this agreement that was signed in 2013. It was signed by all the Arctic nations outside of EPPR, which obviously that's the way exercises and events need to be implemented, but it somewhat causes confusion on how we include permanent participants and observers. But so far, going forward in the planning for the next exercise that will occur in late 2016 under the leadership of the Coast Guard, U.S. Coast Guard, it's been a very transparent process. So I'm excited about this one, and I think it is a big deal for the U.S. Under the overall U.S. chairmanship to show kind of the first exercise under the agreement was started by Canada. They did basically a notification drill and moved a little bit of equipment internally. It was kind of the kickoff to this, and then the U.S.-led exercise will expand on that, hopefully refine the notification process. A lot of contacts had changed, and those EPPR is responsible for keeping those up to date, and then trying to look at different ways of making sure notification after it's occurred that there's actually a response back. So measuring how long it takes for a country to notify another country and how long it takes them to get a response back in terms of, we got your information, we're prepared to provide expertise or equipment or not. So that's kind of the high-level responsibility under that agreement. In mid-September in Washington, D.C., the Coast Guard pulled together the first planning workshop for this exercise. And all of the Arctic nations were asked to bring their high-risk scenarios to this workshop, and they created a scenario library that's available for other people to see and to use, and they're working on 2 planning scenarios right now. They formed a small planning committee just for efficiency, to really design out what the objectives are going to be, where the scenario will be. Is it an amalgamation of all the different scenarios? And the design really is to make sure the spill scenario is interesting enough and complicated enough that the country where the spill is occurring will need to ask for support from other countries. So that's kind of the idea and the scope of that scenario. There will be a planning meeting on the scenario on December 1st in Reykjavik, Iceland, on the margins of our next EPPR meeting. So a lot more to come from that. So I have a bias on this one. So the Arctic Environmental Response Management application is a web mapping application, common operational picture that we developed at the Office of Response and Restoration in collaboration with the University of New Hampshire, with lots of funding entities, including BSEE, Coast Guard, EPA, as well as OSRI, the Oil Spill Recovery Institute in Cordova, for the Arctic IRMA component. And so we presented Arctic IRMA as a platform for sharing basic information across the nation, so kind of infrastructure information, where response equipment and vessels are located, and a little bit on environmental sensitivity information. So that was delivered as a final kind of platform report out to the ministerials. Obviously, I'm hoping that we see this application used for the exercise planning as well as the operational component of the oil spill exercise. And all of the scenarios that I referred to from that planning workshop in DC are on IRMA, so people can go and take a look at those. So our work plan going forward, I kind of mentioned 2 main charges that we're very focused on: search and rescue, as well as the oil spill implementation of the MOSPA agreement and the drill planning for the U.S. chairmanship. There are a couple other projects that are out there. The circumpolar oil spill gap analysis was in early October in Denmark, sponsored by Norway and the U.S. U.S. BSEE was the contributed there, the funding contributor there, and they do have a report out on looking at Arctic risk scenarios and how different response options can and cannot be deployed. So they were looking at a variety of mechanical skimmers and techniques, dispersants deployed from several different platforms, whether it's helo or ship-based. And they were also looking at 2 ways of in situ burning, whether start igniting from a helo or from a ship, or from shore-based. So that report is supposed to provide information into kind of the managing expectations of what can actually be safely done under certain meteorological and oceanographic conditions, and what can't be done. So the next one, the prevention, preparedness, and response for small communities. This is actually a project that's driven by by 2 of the permanent participants, the Aleut International Association and the International Circumpolar Council, and it's funded by Norway and Canada with some in-kind support from the U.S. But it's really focused on increasing capacity for Arctic communities for being first responders and eyes on the ground for the the formal national entities that will be coming in to help respond to incidents that may occur in the communities. This was a really broad proposal originally for basically any disaster, and we focused it down to spills to get it started. But they're developing a framework on kind of expertise within Arctic communities, what's needed in terms of training, and the same type of framework will be applied to other disasters, as I understand it. The U.S., again, BESI and Norway are funding the development of an Arctic-wide response database, and that is just getting off the ground. They're hoping to have that done in 2016 so it can be used as part of that oil spill response exercise that I was speaking of, and we are assuming that the database will be accessible in Arctic Irma. So the next one, the development of safety systems and the implementation of economic and infrastructural projects. This was led by Russia. It was a conference in Sakard in August. Norway was also participating in that. And I believe there is a report for that. The Arctic Rescue Project, again, Russia will be planning another Arctic Rescue project during or exercise during this the U.S. chairmanship. And the other main theme that EEEPR has been designated to lead on is to take some work from a task force on oil pollution prevention, and ensure that the implementation activities under that plan are implemented. And so some of the responsibilities fall in line with EEEPR, but they also fall in line with other working groups, especially PAIM, the Protection of the Arctic Marine Environment, and may be captured through other entities like through the Arctic Hydrographic Regional Commission, and so the hydrographic entities of the respective Arctic nations. So better charting, things of that nature, better shipping standards, better navigational standards, better ice products to enable better navigation and prevention. And the other thing that we're just kind of holding out there, but we don't have any formal projects, is the use of unmanned aerial systems in Arctic spill response. We obviously see a lot of potential there. We've had a few of our delegations have done some experiments. Obviously, the one through the U.S. Coast Guard on the Healy for Arctic Shield the past several years. We've learned lots of lessons there on what will work, what won't work, what type of sensors need to be on the payload, and a big lesson learned in how to really deal with all the data that could be potentially coming from these airborne as well as the glider and drifter systems. So breaking that, coming up with a standardized approach for pulling in those different data streams is something that we're actively working on. So so that's kind of the short overview, just to kind of let you know what we're focused on and where we're going for the next few years. Like I mentioned, I just took on the chairmanship from Ole Christian Shirkimo from Norway. He graciously agreed to stay on as a vice chair, and Jens Peter Holst Andersen from Denmark will take my place in 2017. So we have good coverage. So we have two people over in Europe, myself here in the U.S., and then the U.S. had a delegation of EEEPR's Ann Heinrich from the Department of Energy, and David Moore from BESI is the alternate. Our next meeting is coming up soon in Iceland. And for more information, please feel free to check out the website. And if you're not finding what you need, or you see things, I guess this is especially for Jessica, that you really want me to pull into the IARPIC site, please let me know. And we're trying to get a little bit up to speed on social media. We do have a Twitter account. We're not super active, but we're trying. So that's all I have for right now. I'm happy to entertain questions, and I think we've got a little bit of time for questions.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was a great, very informative presentation. Are there any questions on the phone for Amy?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi, this is Louis Berzuzzi with Shell, and I just wanted to let you guys know I was on the call now and apologize for being late.
No problem.
Great.
No problem. You're next.
Yeah, I might have
Okay.
taken some of your time, Luis.
That's fine.
Are there any questions for Amy? If not, I have a quick one, Amy. I read one of the first draft of the agreement, and I recall that there was something interesting about, well, interesting to me. If a country requests the assistance of another country in the event of an oil spill, it was not for free. Is that correct? The calling country will have to reimburse the assisting countries. Is that correct?
That's usually the case, yeah. And usually that's known up front. I mean, there may be a situation where a country is just going to come in for either for experience or for just in-kind support. Maybe they know they're not going to get. So there could be a situation where that's not necessarily the case, but that's usually the understanding and the expectation.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Amy? Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, Amy. That was very informative, as I said, and thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I look forward to talking to you all more.
Great.